So I'm going to ask you guys a question first. I'm actually going to send out a poll to you in just a moment to ask you where you feel is the worst place in a sales process is to actually get a price objection. So what's the worst place in a oh, here we go. You've already got the poll there. So is it at the beginning? Is it at the end? Is it all of the above? Is it in the middle? Is it at the start and the end of the process? So there are actually two really dangerous places to get price objections, and I'll just share the poll with you so that you can see that there. So we've got 50% of you saying at the beginning is the worst place to get a price objection. You're absolutely right. 25% are saying at the end, and 25% are saying all of the above. Now, it's never actually good to get a price objection anywhere in a process, is it? But there are actually two parts of the process which are the most dangerous parts to get them. And that is really at the start and also at the end. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about why the start is so dangerous in a moment. And we're actually going to be looking at how to deal with price objections when we get them at the start of a conversation, because we've all had those cringe-worthy moments where we have a price objection and we're just not armed to deal with it at that particular moment in time. So at the end of the process, like during the middle of the process, those price objections come up. You have an opportunity to actually try and resolve those while you're working through the process with the client. So while it's never nice to get one in the middle, you've always got an opportunity to have demonstrated your credibility, to substantiate your cost or your price. And you've also got an opportunity to negotiate it before you go too far into the process. If you get a price objection at the end of a process, so you're about to make a placement and a client objects to the placement fee or the salary. I mean, a lot of you on this call, I'm sure, have had that experience, and none of us are immune to that. And it's a really high risk strategy, because retrospective negotiation on contingent placements is actually really, really dangerous, because we're getting to the point where we've done all of this work for zero exchange of money so far, and the candidate may or may not get the job based on the results of our negotiation. So what this is telling us is that we have to talk about price. There's no getting away from price. And if a client isn't talking about price, then you need to bring it up at some stage during the sales process. Now, I've got some stats here that I'll share with you based on what buyers are doing in their buyer behavior. So according to recent research, it's 58%, so almost 6 out of 10 buyers will ask for a price on a first call. So what this is telling us is that we've got to get really, really, really good and comfortable with dealing with price objections and actually substantiating our value as opposed to the price that we offer with that. So, and I'm sure that's why lots of you are on the call today, is because you've had this experience where clients have actually asked you how much it is on your first call. Now, I'm going to talk to you in just a moment about how to deal with that. There's some strategies and how you can deal with that. But what I want to talk to you about is on the best times to discuss price on a call with a client. So according to Gong's analysis of over 25,000 sales calls, there are actually best times to discuss price. And that is between 13 and 20 minutes and 40 and 49 minutes. So there'll be some variances here in terms of how long you have a client on the phone for, if it's a scheduled teleconference, if it's a meeting, etc. But in terms of the sales conversation itself, the best times are that 13 to 20 minutes or 40 to 49 minutes. Now, I'm going to throw a question out to the group in terms of why you actually think that these parts in a sales conversation would be the best time to actually talk about price. So why is it between 13 and 20 minutes and not before? And why between 40 and 49 minutes? What do you guys think? Just pop your answers in the chat box for me in terms of your perception of why these are the best times. So Reese, we've got build trust. Absolutely. You've got, 13 minutes doesn't sound like a long time, but it actually is when you're on a phone call with somebody and you're establishing some level of trust and rapport. Michelle, M. Christmas, I think that's Michael, isn't it? Mr. Christmas. But so it's rapport. So absolutely building rapport, relationship building, develop an understanding. It's also a closing technique. Absolutely right. Demonstrate your value first. Yes, absolutely. Yes, it is Michael. Sorry. I did see your name actually on another list recently, and I thought, what a cool name, Mr. Christmas. I'm sure you get that a lot though. So you're absolutely right in all of these answers between the 13 and 20 minutes. If we talk about price before 13 minutes, we don't have an opportunity to demonstrate any relationship management, any rapport, any credibility. We can't demonstrate, and we actually have no idea what the client perceives as value. So even if the client isn't bringing price up in the first 13 to 20 minutes, it's still a good time to discuss that. And certainly if it's not being discussed between 40 and 49 minutes, then it's your responsibility to actually bring up the price in the conversation. Because as I say, retrospective recruitment is a high-risk strategy, a really high-risk strategy. I cannot tell you over the last 21 years since I've been in the industry how many conversations I've had with recruiters that get to the end of a process and then the client wants to have a price. And that's so frustrating for all parties involved, especially if it impacts on the candidate as well. The best times to discuss the price are those. So it's really dangerous at the front end of the process for a client not to give you an opportunity to do all of these things that you've listed in here with relationship building, rapport, demonstrating credibility, understanding their needs. And that's really because you haven't identified any needs at all. So what happens when you don't identify any needs is that we cannot demonstrate value. There's just no way that we can demonstrate value if we don't understand what the challenge is. And if we want to demonstrate value and take the conversation away from price and focus the conversation on value, then we need to identify a need first. So what we actually need to do is establish the need to establish the value to substantiate our prices. We're not always given the luxury of being able to establish the need to establish the value first. So, some of you may have experienced comments like these. I'm not working with you unless you can do it for 10%. Before you say anything, I want to know what your fees are. Some of you may have had these types of experiences, and, in more kind of like cutthroat, aggressive, let's get down to money kind of conversations, you're going to have these types of comments and conversations very quickly with some clients. So I'm interested to hear from your perspective, day to day when you're coming up against price objections, what are the biggest ones that you're experiencing right now? And it will vary across your vertical markets and your industry sectors and the type of recruitment that you do, whether you're kind of high volume temp or whether you're, exec search on a retained assignment. Well, what are the price objections in terms of words are you hearing right now from your clients? Just pop them in the chat box for me so I can get a feel for what we're working with today. Because I'm going to share with you a formula a little bit later on how to actually deal with objections, but I'd like to see some examples of real objections. David, we've got you need to beat the competition. Certainly in your market space, in the engineering space, you will have very blunt conversations like this with clients, won't you? So either beat the competition or we're not working with you. What else are you guys getting in terms of price objections? Anything different to, if it's not 10%, I'm not doing it. Or before you say anything, what are your fees? It's not in the budget. We've already started the process. Absolutely. Now, budget and forecast are two different, cash flow are two different things. And sometimes is this a real objection or is it a smokescreen objection? We'll talk about that a little bit more. So we've got a big focus on matching competition. And it's, I think as an industry, we've developed this view as an industry over the last 20 years, certainly since I've been in the industry. There's this view that if it's not based on this price and you can't match it, then we're not doing business with you. And it's really unfortunate. So it's our jobs actually to try and push through that a little bit. Some of these you may not be able to push through because of the way that business is set up, and it may actually be a bona fide real objection from a client. So let's have a look at the motivations behind objections first, because motivations behind objections actually give us some clues in terms of how to actually deal with them and where the client may actually be coming from. So firstly, we've got a smoke screen objection. So a smoke screen is exactly that. It's not actually the real objection. If you think about, I often say to recruiters, if you think about the amount of sales calls perhaps a client may get in a week. So you've got some clients that may get several calls a day from recruiters. There was Andy who's on this call today. He asked a client last week how many people called him, and he said generally he got 26 calls from recruiters the week before. Now 26 calls is a fair number, but I have known much bigger numbers than that with HR contacts within businesses getting lots of calls. So from a smokescreen perspective, going straight to price could just be them having a quick get out of jail free card. So it could be them wanting to end the conversation quite quickly, and they know if they talk about price, then they can potentially get you off the phone quite quickly, especially if they're giving you really low margins that they think that you need to match. So let's think about it for a second. If you're about to get a new insurance policy, and your new insurer that you're getting a quote from asks you how much you're paying your previous insurance company. Now, most of us are honest souls, but in a situation like that, we might be tempted to lowball that price a little bit. We might say, my previous insurer was charging me $400, whereas your previous insurer might have been charging you $440. So we're going to lowball the price a little bit to see if we can save more money on our future car insurance. Now, I'm not saying that any of you on the call do that, or even myself, but it's just human nature sometimes is to actually try and think about getting the best deal, which kind of leads into my next point as well. So the smokescreen objection can be you get out of jail free card, we can end this conversation. And then we have the buyer's beliefs, right? So the buyer believes that everything is negotiable, that you don't get discounts unless you ask. So what they're actually leading with is the fact that if they ask you for a discount or they ask you if it's negotiable, stands a chance it will be discounted and it is negotiable. So it's actually based on their belief system that you can get everything cheaper than what it actually is. We've also got trying to compare apples with apples. Now, here's the thing, actually, it could be quite a common mistake for clients to actually think that all recruiters are exactly the same. Okay, we advertise, we've got a database, we interview, we pre-screen, we interview, we present candidates. We all go through the same process. So from their perspective, they're going, okay, well, they all do the same thing. So if one of them is charging me 12% and one of them wants to charge me 15%, I don't see why I would do that, because I'm just getting the same thing. But in the business world, and certainly in professional services and business solutions, there never really is a true apple for apples, because in essence, the process that you go through is actually comparable, but they're not apples for apples, because the solutions that you offer might be significantly different to the solutions that a competitor can offer. So for them, in their minds, they're just going, you're all the same, so why would I pay one more than the other? Also, they might be exposed to preferred supplier agreements. So with preferred supplier agreements, whether they're a national agreement or a global agreement, businesses will have this in place, and they're at really low margins. So, and the reason they're at low margins is because there's a critical mass with the economies of scale that actually make it a profitable account over the country or over the world. in the volumes that people deal with. So when clients have had exposure to preferred supplier agreements, who may be paying, something ridiculous like 6 or 8% margins on preferred supplier agreements, they're actually going to apply that same standard to a standard recruitment process, where they might enlist the help of specialist boutique agencies that can't actually fulfill the types of roles that they have in the preferred supplier agreements. Now, between us on this call, there's an argument here with PSAs around the fact that if you have a consultant that is working in a really candidate short market and is on a preferred supplier agreement with a big company, and they have service level agreements in place, and they have to fulfill those in order to continue to maintain that account. If you presented them with an option of a really skilled short candidate, a great candidate who is open to working for multiple businesses, even though there are service level agreements for those preferred supplier agreements, the consultant may be a little bit more inclined to push the candidate towards the clients that are prepared to pay 15, 18, 20% on placement fees, as opposed to the preferred supplier agreements that might be 10% or less. It's kind of natural, commercial instinct to make it more commercially viable to place these candidates in multiple areas. So the preferred supplier agreements aren't getting exclusive candidates. They're not getting first pick of the candidates that are available. Sometimes clients tactfully need educating on that process, that they cannot compare preferred supplier agreements with a very tailored, bespoke, boutique specialist agency that can certainly focus on trying to find them candidates that their current preferred suppliers may not actually use them as a preferred account. They might want to place a candidate somewhere else and potentially double their margins that they're placing somewhere else. And with preferred supplier agreements, there are always going to be challenges. If you're locked into a panel, there are always going to be challenges in terms of the turnaround times or the understanding of the business models, or if you get jobs through portals and you're not allowed to contact the manager to understand more about those jobs. All of those are going to bring challenges for the recruiter, but also for the client. So the client may be exposed to these lower rates, but they've also been exposed to bigger challenges than perhaps someone that would pay full fees for candidates. And then we've got a lack of perceived value. So I'll tell you a little story. I had quite a heated debate with somebody in Melbourne a few years ago now it was, and I was at a conference and a barrister asked me what kind of training that I do. And I said, well, I only train recruiters. I've worked in the recruitment sector for 21 years. That's all I train. And he scoffed at me and he said, oh, recruitment is the last rort, isn't it? And I was really puzzled and a bit confused. And I said to him, well, why do you think that it's the last rort? And he said, well, I hired a barrister and I gave the job to an agency. Within a couple of hours, they came back with somebody that was really good, and I wanted to hire them. And they wanted to charge me $22,000 fee for hiring this barrister. And he said, it was 2 hours worth of work. It wasn't even 2 hours worth of work. And I don't even get paid $22,000 an hour. And I'm a high-end barrister. And I was a little shocked that he thought that that's all it took. All it took was a recruiter to actually, less than 2 hours, get a resume to him. So I said to him, have you actually considered how much work went into the back end of that process? The candidate that was presented to you may have been courted by that particular recruiter through their career. They may have had a 10-year relationship with this barrister through their entire career. They may have placed them, before and they've come back to them. They may have maintained a relationship with them for a big period of time. They may have put on networking events or added value to their market segment to keep them engaged and keep them aligned with their business. It's not about 90 minutes worth of getting a resume to somebody. So to me, that was kind of like the typical example of a lack of perceived value in exactly what it is that we do. And then finally, they might just be unclear of the services that you offer. So if they've had, not an end-to-end recruitment process before, if part of it has been chunked up or chunked down or unbundled, or they've worked in RPO models or things like that, they might not be clear on what your services are. So it's up to us to ask them questions about what their understanding is. Now, back to Michelle's point earlier, let's not forget the fact that some of the price objections are actually going to be real objections. So if you do have a client that has a preferred supplier agreement in place, we can't assume that they can't step outside of that, and we can't assume that they can't pay more than that, because I know heads of recruitment teams who have preferred supplier agreements, and they will step outside those agreements for critical roles. Where they want to go and map the market and have a full kind of executive search program. So they will pay the full amount for those full services. So let's not assume that their price objection is real, but their price objection could be real. I've worked with businesses where they have in-house teams and the only KPI that they have is zero spend on external agencies. Or if they have a preferred supplier agreement, they are not allowed to step outside of that agreement at all. That is actually a case as well. But we can't assume that that's okay, that's the case. Just because they have a preferred supplier agreement doesn't mean that they can't step outside of that or pay more for a different type of service. So what happens when we get that, match the competition, if you can't do 10%, I'm not dealing with you. Before we go any further, I want to know what your price is. What do we do when that happens? Because it does happen. So I like to call these prickly questions. And a prickly question to me just means that it's a question we need to answer at some point, but it's a bit uncomfortable for us to answer it at this particular point. So what we're going to do is we're going to handball this prickly question back to the client. And by handballing it back to the client, I mean that we're not actually going to answer the question. So some sales experts reckon that you can ask 3 more questions. You can get away with asking 3 more questions before you actually deal with an objection. Now, this is completely based on context, and it will be completely based on the conversation that you're having with the person that you're having the conversation with. I'm not sure I agree on just ignoring it and asking 3 more questions. So this is a technique that I teach people. So to handball the prickly question back to the client is like what we don't want to do, what we absolutely do not want to do if we can stop the conversation at all, is we do not want to talk about price at the start of a discussion. Never, ever, ever, ever. It's a golden rule of value selling, is we never talk about price at the beginning of the discussion. If the client takes you there, there's not much that you can do about that apart from handball it back to them. But it kind of gives you a little bit of an indicator as to whether they're trying to use a smoke screen to get rid of you, or whether they have a genuine price objection, or whether it's just about price and not about value. So a technique here is to actually just, if they ask you about price, etc., is just to hold the silence for a few seconds. Now, most salespeople are actually visually preferenced people by virtue of the fact that they work in sales or a sales-related industry. So we find it really uncomfortable to hold silences because we're not built that way. So this is actually a little bit uncomfortable for a lot of salespeople, but it's just to actually hold the silence just for a few seconds, almost like you're taken back a little bit by their demand, and that you're just processing that they've asked for you to what your price is, or that you need to match this, or they've been quite aggressive with you at the front end of the process. Now, the golden kind of figure here is 3 to 5 seconds. So I'll let you assess whether it sounds like you've hung up on them or not. But just really holding the silence for a few seconds is really powerful when you're actually thinking about negotiation techniques. So for me, I think that it's always good to acknowledge an objection rather than ignore it and ask 3 more questions. It's just to really acknowledge the objection with a level of empathy. So a simple way that you can do this is just to simply say, I understand that price is important to you. So like, I've heard you, I acknowledge you, I empathize with you, I understand what it is that, I understand what the objection is. And then what we want to do is actually give the client a benefit of waiting until you've gained more information about their needs. So we have to still allow them to think that we are looking at the best solution for them, and there will be a benefit in them giving us more information. So you can do this very simply by saying, look, to give you the best solution, I need to find out some information about your needs. You're just simply saying to them, to give you the best price, to give you the best solution, to give you the best value, I need to know more before I can give you the price. So, you know, these are just ways in which you can reword, if these slides will be available to you after today's session. So just think about how you can reword these so it's authentic to you and is natural to you, and how you would discuss some level of negotiation with someone. So what we're actually trying to do here is not answer the question at all, but acknowledge it, give some empathy towards it, and then actually give a benefit of why you need to ask more questions to understand more before you can give them the best solution. Because the best solution may be way better than the solution that they have at the moment. It's not about cost. It's not about price, though. It's about the cost of not doing something with it. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. So what we need to do then is take them to a specific, then ask a specific open questions to keep the conversation flowing. So what we've actually done is we've had the conversation has been a little bit stunted. You know, the client has stopped us in our tracks. They've said, right, how much is it? So it's our job to actually go, okay, I acknowledge that. Here's the benefit of giving me more information. So let's move into how I can elicit more information from you to substantiate the fact that I'm not going to match your current provider, and these are the reasons why. So we need to ask questions that uncover a solution, because when we uncover a solution, then we're able to substantiate how much we charge. So just think about what a solution is for a moment. So a solution is a mutually agreed upon answer to a recognized problem or opportunity, and the answer must provide a measurable improvement. So this is really key here, a measurable improvement. So we can't possibly demonstrate a measurable improvement on their current situation, their current providers, or what they're currently doing themselves, unless we understand the information about that. So it takes us to push back on the clients a little bit to actually say to them, I really want to help us come to some kind of solution and give you the best option and show you a measurable improvement. And in order to do that, I need to know a little bit more information. So however you want to deliver that sentence to them, it's all about, I have your best intentions at mind. I want to give you the best offering, but I just need to know more about what it is that you're actually looking for and what your challenges are, so I can give you the best solution. So in terms of gathering that information, so those of you that have been into any of my sales training recently, you'll recognize this slide. So this is just a refresher for you guys, but those of you that are new to me or my training content, I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of a questioning structure that links into a solution sales model. It's something that I designed a few years ago, and it's specifically for the recruitment industry. And what we're actually trying to do is look at how can we build a sales conversation that gives you the information that you need in order for you to find a solution for that particular business. So the first line of questioning will always be around the contact or the company. So for example, if you have someone that objects to you quite quickly, you tell them that you need to know a little bit more information to offer them the best solution. Then what we want to do is kind of steer them back towards a rapport building kind of questioning technique, because they've already stopped the process. They've already said, no, I'm not listening to you. So what we need to do is actually pull the client, we need to hook the client into a conversation and ask some rapport building questions. And the best way to do that is actually to talk to them about them or them about their company. So you'll know from your own research what they do and where they're based and what their core products are and what their services are and all, how long the contacts worked there, because you've probably looked them up on LinkedIn. Let's not make any assumptions. Let the client, let them tell their own story about themselves. So you might want to switch the questioning to what their experiences are, how long they've been with the business, how the company is structured, what are the forecasts and projects for them coming up. Whatever the context of the conversation is for you, that's what we want to divert the questioning techniques back to, is you understanding a little bit more about them personally or professionally, and also the business in which they work for, because that's when the rapport will start to build on the tail end of an objection. Then we'll manoeuvre quite nicely into organisational kind of charts. How's the organisation set up? What staff work within the business? What skill sets they have? What team sizes they have? What's their turnover rates? What's their attrition rates? There's all sorts of questions you can ask here in terms of important information for you to understand the locality of the teams, the culture, the training and development, the onboarding, all sorts, again, in context of the conversation that you're having with that particular person. So all of a sudden we're talking about staff and skill sets and how many contractors do they have and how many permanent staff do they have and what projects what staff have they got working on particular projects, etc., etc. Then it quite nicely kind of like molds into talking about recruitment. So this is structured so that you can ask a few questions from each sequence of the flow of the conversation, but ultimately what we're actually doing is steering the question back to recruitment. But we're not talking about recruitment straight away on the back end of the objection. What we're trying to do is elicit a little bit more information, because when we elicit a little bit more information about the company and their staff structure and their turnover and things like that, it actually gives us more information to talk about value, not cost, or value, not price. So if we go straight to recruitment and just talk about recruitment, we might be quite limited in our negotiation techniques with that. So the recruitment questions, it'd be second nature to ask the recruitment questions on, who do you use, what's your process, how's that working for you, when you do hire, what methods do you use, all of the standard recruitment questions you would ask anyway. Now with recruitment, there are always, doesn't matter if you're in-house, if you're doing the recruitment yourself, if you have an in-house recruitment team, if you're using external agencies, if you're using an RPO solution, if you're using a independent recruiter, it doesn't matter who's doing the recruitment. By virtue of recruitment itself, there will always be challenges. So with the recruitment questions, it's a beautiful segue to actually then start to talk about the strategic questions that you need to pull the information to actually substantiate the cost of your services. So pain questions are really, really, really important when it comes to trying to sell on value rather than sell on price. So I've got some examples of strategic pain questions which we're going to move through today. But if any of you wanted more information on the company organizational recruitment questions, feel free to flick me an email after this, and I'm happy to share a little bit more information about those components. But for this particular webinar, I'm just going to focus on the pain questions because this is where the value add is. So with our pain questions, what we're actually trying to pull from clients is how we can demonstrate value to them through asking questions to understand what it is that they want. So ultimately, we're looking to find out, what does value mean to them? Because value means different things to different people. Value might mean the fact that you're able to get someone to them as quickly as possible. It might be quantitative, it might be timelined, it might be just qualitative in terms of how they expect to be dealt with. There's all sorts of different reasons that clients deal with different recruiters. So through our questioning, we need to understand what does value actually mean to them individually, because it's not a blanket approach. What challenges do they have? Now, the longer you've been in recruitment, the more challenges you would have heard, and you might have heard the same situation with similar clients over multiple years. You may have come across that situation and make some assumptions of what the challenges that client has. What we need to do is actually really pinpoint what challenges do they specifically have and allow them to tell their story. How can you actually solve this? So it's not a case of you pitching your solution just yet. It's about you asking questions on how the client thinks that this could be solved. And then you'll be able to see whether it's something that you can sell based on the solution that the client's looking for. How do they rate the quality of their current provider? Can be a tricky one, actually, because what we don't want to do is actually be unprofessional and talk ill of any of the competition. And if clients don't know you very well, they're probably not going to tell you the full extent of how they find their current provider. They may just smoke screen you a little bit and say, yep, they're good, yep, they're okay, etc., etc. So this one might take a little bit of digging. A good technique that we used to use, which was very effective from a sales perspective, was really just, if looking at the length of their relationship or the previous recruitment drive that they've conducted, how would they rate the process? So it's not necessarily identifying it to a particular provider, but just how would they rate the process? 1 being it was terrible, 10 being it was fantastic and could not be improved upon. Now 10 is actually a really interesting figure. From a human nature perspective, 10 actually means perfection, right? And none of us are perfect. There's going to be issues, there's going to be problems, there's going to be challenges that arise. There'll be candidates that will pull out of the process. There'll be candidates that will want to negotiate their salary after they've been presented at a certain position, etc., etc. So if someone says 10, it's kind of saying that it was perfect and there were no challenges. But if someone says there was an 8 or a 7 out of 10, it gives you a golden opportunity to say to them, what would they have needed to do to actually get the score to a 10? And little kind of poignant questions like that uncover so much information about what it is that the client values. What improvements are needing to be made, not necessarily with their current provider, but also in-house in their own recruitment. Oh, I just need to move the chat box so I can see what this one says. So how does this impact on them or their business, the improvements or the challenges that they come up against? Is there another way to serve them better? How can you save them money, whether that be directly or indirectly? Because ultimately, this is a price objection, right? So, but there are ways that you can save them money. If the time to hire is shortened, if projects aren't being impacted because they don't have someone in those roles, you can save them money directly or indirectly. So it's not actually about the price of the service, it's the cost of it not being rectified. How can you save them time in the process, which will indirectly and directly save them money? And then how can you give them peace of mind that you can actually solve this? So all of this we kind of need to uncover in our questioning structure. And if it's a new client and they have an objection with pricing already, then you have to do a little bit of work in terms of the quality of the questions that you ask. So I've been a specific sales trainer for about 12 years now. And I always say the best salespeople I've ever met and the best negotiators I've ever met aren't actually the ones that pitch well and negotiate well. They're the ones that ask really great questions to lead the clients to the answer and actually have a natural close in the process. So there's broadly speaking, there are 3 things that we need to pull from a client with our questioning. How can we save them time? How can we save them money? And how can we give them peace of mind? So saving money for them might be misguided in the fact that they only want to pay you a certain amount in placement fee. Whereas there's other ways in which you can save money, even if your placement fee is 3 or 5% higher than their current provider. So I'm going to share with you the importance of pain questions and the difference between different types of pain questions. And with any objection, but specifically price, pain objections are really, really important. So there are two different types of pain. There's direct pain and there's indirect pain. So with direct pain, what we're actually looking at doing is going, okay, this is your situation. This is what happened. What's the pain associated with that? So we need to understand a current circumstance around what pain means to them and how it's affected them, and what happened in that situation. I'm going to give you a bunch of examples in a moment. But then you'll have clients like I mentioned earlier, that don't want to say to you, that won't say to you that they have problems or challenges in their current process. So let's not, if someone's saying I don't have any problems or I don't have any challenges, I would say that's untrue, because there's always going to be challenges and problems in recruitment. It's just the nature of what we do, because our product are human beings and they have their own minds and they make their own decisions and they change their minds all the time. And they're well within their rights to do that, but we're the ones that need to deal with the fact that this is the challenge in our industry. So if someone's telling you they don't have a challenge and they don't have any pain, I would actually think about what indirect pain strategies you can apply to them to actually make them think about what could happen if this situation arose for them. So they're not declaring to you that they have a problem, but we're going to suppose a problem to them. So it's almost like a what if. What if this happened? Have you thought about that? So let me bring it down more narrow into specific examples for you. So I'll let you have. I'll send these slides to you guys so you don't have to speedily write these down, because there's lots of these coming up. But I'll read these out to you, and then I'll make the slides available to you also. So here's an example of a direct pain question. So you mentioned that the growth in the business has meant that you are putting a considerable amount of time into recruitment. How do you feel this taking up so much of your? How do you feel about this taking up so much of your time? And what effect does this have on your normal business duties? So this would be someone that's actually already admitted that they were putting in a lot of time into the recruitment process and they've been neglecting their day-to-day business. So we actually need to talk to them about what does that mean to them? How has it affected their normal business duties? Are they working longer hours? Are they working at weekends? Is it impacting on their family? Is it impacting on staff around them? Are they moving the jobs around, or is it just piling up and it's causing a bit of stress and a little bit of anxiety for them at some point? Another one here is, you said that you had combated staff shortages with increasing people's workloads. How do you feel this has affected morale? So if jobs become unfilled and those skills and those duties, those activities and duties still need to be fulfilled, if someone else is picking up the slack, it's obviously going to affect them over a long-term basis. So, we just need to ask the question, how do you feel it's affected morale in this particular circumstance? Another example of that might be, what are the implications of, and this will depend on your conversation, what are the implications of multiple suppliers, no standard rates, needs not being met, no standard recruitment process, it's not timely, etc. Whatever they said to you that needed to be improved upon in your questioning, a really good pain question is to say, well, what's the implication of this and how does it impact on your business? So if you've got clients that are dealing with multiple agencies at very low rates, that aren't prioritizing their jobs, that aren't giving them exclusive candidates, there's no standard recruitment process, ask them a pain question about ultimately, what impact is this having on the business? What we actually want to do is get to the point where we're saying, well, if it's causing you this much pain, then paying me a little bit more money to solve this is a no-brainer, really. I'm putting that in very short terms, but it would be a no-brainer for them just to think about investing a little bit more money to get a superior product that can solve their problems. So I've got some examples of indirect pain for you now as well. So indirect pain could be, you mentioned you were looking for XYZ skill set, And based on my knowledge in this sector, this is a pretty hard skill set to find. What would be the impact on the project if you weren't able to find someone in time? So the client hasn't told us that they've got a problem with the skill set. The client hasn't told us that any implications on a project when the project's, we may know from our conversation with them when the project's going to start. They haven't actually admitted that there's a problem. So we're actually talking about, what would be the impact? Suppose this is going to happen to you. I've seen it happen before. What about if this happens to you? What's the impact on that to you? So it's the difference between direct and indirect, if you guys are getting me on this one. So this one is a supposition question in some respects. What is your backup plan if you can't get the volume of people you require in that period of time? Another one for you. What would be the consequence to your business if you weren't able to find a replacement for this critical role? So they're not saying that it's taken too long. They're not saying that it's they've got a challenge with it. We're just saying, okay, what is the consequence if you can't find the replacement for this role? I know the role's quite critical to your business. So these are the types of questions that actually set up a value conversation as opposed to a price conversation. I've actually got a bunch of other examples I'm going to share with you. But in terms of demonstrating value and negotiating effectively, this is where the gold is. This is where the sales kind of magic fairy dust is. We sprinkle some of these questions layered into a conversation, and then we can support our value as opposed to our costs. So with any kind of objection, I'm going to share with you some more objections in a minute around, you're too expensive, etc., and just some generic kind of responses to objections. But I wanted to share with you my pacing objections formula. And now this is valid for all objections. It's not just on price objections, but I like to think of objections as an opportunity for you to learn more about either the client, the situation, the challenge, the objection. Whenever someone objects to you, always use it as an opportunity to learn a little bit more about where it is that they're coming from. Let's never assume that the first objection is the real objection, because as we've already mentioned, some objections can actually just be smoke screens. Some objections are clients just putting a wall up because it's easier to put a wall up than actually talk to us about that. If we try and resolve an objection that's not real, then you can't demonstrate value because the objection's not real in the first place. So LEARN is an acronym. I love an acronym, me. LEARN is an acronym around how to actually deal with those objections. So we've got, first of all, we need to listen. If someone's objecting to you, your product or your service or your price, it's already a situation that's a little bit, there's a little bit of tentativeness around how we should approach that. So never cut somebody off when they object to you. What we're actually doing is going through a process of completely listening. And that's not hearing what they're saying. It's actually really listening and analysing what they're actually telling you. We also need to layer in some empathy there. So the simple example that I showed you earlier on in the presentation was, I understand that price is really important to you. It doesn't matter what type of objection it is, you can actually say to them, you understand, or I've heard this before, or this is an experience that some of my clients have, or I hear you, or I get it. However you want to display empathy to them, you want to let them know that you've heard them and you understand them. And the next part is assessing. So how do we assess whether this is a smokescreen objection or whether it's a real objection? Do they really have a company directive that they can't pay above 12% to anybody? Or is it just them trying to say that just to see whether you'd negotiate or just to get rid of you? So what we actually need to do is just assess it. And what we're actually doing with our assessment is just asking a few more questions. I'm going to give you some examples of that in a moment. So just a layer of more questions just to try and understand it. Once we know that the objection is a real objection, then we're in a really good position to try and resolve the objection. And overcome the objection for them and clear up any misunderstandings or clarify more information that they need. And then you're in a much better position to try and negotiate closer to the fee that you're looking for, or negotiate an outcome which might not even be attached to a fee, but it's a negotiation of the solution that you can offer that by assessing it and resolving the objection that they have. So for me, this works on any objection that a client gives you. But let's look at how we relate this to some price objections. So here are some examples around you're too expensive. So from you're too expensive, here are some potential rebuttals that you can offer to you're too expensive. So I'm just checking time to make sure that we're not going over. So I appreciate your position. May I ask what you're comparing the cost to? So here we're actually just straight out, I appreciate your position. I appreciate your point of view. I appreciate the price is important to you. I just want to understand what you're comparing it to, because they may not be comparing apples for apples. They might be comparing apples for oranges, and that's why there's a price differentiator. From my knowledge in the market at the moment, the candidates that have skills and experience you want are asking for charge rate. If that's beyond your budget, we'll need to set our sights a little lower. Which of these skills, experience, or qualifications is not essential? So what we're actually saying here is, okay, so I'm an industry expert. I know what candidates want. If you can't pay that, if it's a charge rate that their price objection is about, if they can't pay that, then they need to think about what it is that they're prepared to give up in order to get the candidate. So skills, experience, or qualifications, which of them are not essential? Let's take that away and we can lower the pay rate for you. So that's a good one for contractors. We've got one here which is for temps. Good temps are in high demand. They might accept lower wages initially, but they'd probably keep looking for a better opportunity. I would strongly suggest you safeguard your business from the risk of losing someone after a few days or weeks. This will save you money and time in the long term. How does that sound to you? So this one sounds a little bit salesy, I know. So it's about taking these kind of responses and thinking about how you personally would respond to this type of price objection in your own words. And that's why I'm going to share slides with you. Another one is, what is your current understanding of what we do? Apples for oranges again. Do they actually thoroughly understand what it is that you do? Do you have a point of difference? Is there something different in your process? Can you substantiate a different level of success with certain types of roles in certain industry sectors? So you can say, well, that's certainly part of it. Let me explain how we earn our fees and what's actually involved. Some more examples for you. I understand how you feel. In fact, some of my best clients felt the exact same way before they tried our service. And what they have found was that our fees were worth it because we provided exclusive candidates they couldn't get elsewhere. Does this sound like something that could benefit you? So again, you might want to rephrase this, trim it down, add some more information, make it very contextual to the conversation that you're in and make it more relevant. But that's a way of going, I understand how you feel. Some of my best clients felt the same way, but this is what they found. And then the end of that sentence is whatever you feel is appropriate for the conversation that you're having. What would be the cost of hiring the wrong person? Just between us in the bracket, studies estimate the cost of around 3 times the candidate's annual salary. Now, this is actually dependent on what research you look at. Some people say it's up to 5 times the annual salary. So, what impact could hiring the wrong person have on your business? What effect might that have on clients, staff morale, and you personally? Another example, to clarify what you're saying, that our prices are high in comparison to our competitors. What service are they currently offering you for that price? Again, we're getting away from apples for apples. Is it apples for oranges? What are they actually getting? And if you've asked some really great paying questions, here you've got a position that you can be in where you can say, well, they're actually only a 7 out of 10. And the value of this, you're saying it could have been improved in these areas. This is how I can actually solve that problem for you. So my offering, my services are actually a little bit different to the ones that you're having. So that's why the cost is a little bit different. So all links back to your pain questions. You know, if we go back a few slides, all of this links back into really great pain questions. So I've given you a bunch of examples here, but I do have a handout which is 30 responses to price objections. The ones I've shared with you, I've made very recruitment specific based on coaching that I've done and sales training that I've done with recruiters over the years. But here I've got a handout, very, very basic standard responses to sales objections and a little bit of context around what it is about those, an explanation around why you would respond in that way and what kind of response we're trying to elicit. So some examples for you might be too expensive compared to what? You know, it's pretty direct, pretty straight down the line. What's it too expensive compared to? I hear you, the best products are often more expensive. You know, if you've got an inferior product and I've got a better product, it's clearly going to cost you more money. Are there some areas that I can clarify for you? You know, is there something that they don't understand? How much will it cost if you do nothing about this situation? So it's not actually about how much the price value of the placement fee is. What is the cost to their business, their staff, themselves, if they don't actually do anything about it and continue to keep replicating the same challenges that they have? Another one is cash flow an issue or is it a budget issue? Cash flow and budget are two different things. And what you'd be able to do is might flush out whether it is a budget issue or whether it's a cash flow issue. Setting price aside, do we have the service that you would want to buy? You know, if we took price out of the equation, you know, is this what you're looking for? Can I solve this situation for you? Let's just think about taking the price away for a minute. And what are the most valuable parts of the products or the service for you? So you're actually getting the client to tell you what they value the most about the service. So if it's actually a full end-to-end process that they're looking for, then you know you're on the right track, right? If it's just part of the process they're looking for, then you may have an opportunity to negotiate. So I have that handout. Sorry, I have that handout that I can send to you all. I'll show you where it's available so you can go in and download that with today's slides as well. Sorry, we're just a couple of minutes over. This is my last slide, which I'll end on. And if any of you want to stay on the call with any Q&A, then I'll unmute you all and we can ask some questions if you have a little bit more time. So the golden rules of negotiation, let me just run through these. Be confident and avoid any remarks that suggest it's negotiable. So things like around, about, normally, you know, those types of words really underpin the confidence around you delivering your price. Your price is your price. It is this. That is it. No suggestion at all that it's negotiable. If somebody questions you on your price, your first line of response is always to defend and justify and support your fees by saying, I need to understand a little bit more about what it is that you want in order for me to give you the best solution. Never ever lower your rate on the first ask. So even if you think you're in danger of losing the client if you're not prepared to negotiate, what message does that send if you say to a client, our rates are 18% and the client says, I'll only pay 12, and then straight away you say, okay, 12% it is. It actually undervalues your value. It undervalues your service, the value that you're offering. And it also might suggest that you were trying to highball them in the first place. That 18% is just the number on the contract. It's not actually the number that you aim for. So even if you have to tell them you need to go away and have a look at it and understand what it is that they're looking for and find the best solution for them, never ever lower your rate when they first ask you. Try and focus on adding value rather than lowering the price. So what else can you give them through the questioning techniques that you've actually applied? What information have they given you where you can say, okay, well, I can add this value and this value and this value, which is something that you're not getting now. So, so that's actually included in this price. It just costs more, but you get more for it. Number 5, know your bargaining power. If you can negotiate and if you're willing to negotiate, be clear in your head of where you're going to go to, and also know when it's time to walk away. If you've got a client that's hard on you about the rates and will only work at a certain amount and is very firm about that, then you know that they're actually very focused on the cost of the service, not the value of the service. Are they going to be a great client for you? Do you want a whole bunch of clients that won't give you exclusive work and won't work with you on the rates that you deserve? The golden rule is get before you give. So if you do decide to discount, what is it that you want from them first? What is it that they can do? You know, clients ask me if they can, if they book certain amounts of numbers, do they get group discounts and all of that kind of stuff. Like, I wouldn't do that because I've got another person that would pay full price for the training session. So that would be a seat that's gone because a group discount was applied to it. But if they were willing to give me something, like they were willing to book 3 training sessions in advance, then I would think about giving them something back in return. So it's just the golden rules of negotiation. I'm actually incredibly generous with my content and with my training and my IP. I'm not precious at all. It's just the golden rule of negotiation. Let's think about what we can get in terms of exclusivity or advanced bookings or notice or warnings or before we actually say, yep, we can do this for you as well. What other services can you offer as well? Because sometimes you might be trying to put a square peg into a round hole and the client just doesn't want the full end-to-end process. They may only want you to advertise and shortlist and they'll take it from there. So just think about, you know, is the service that you're offering the service that they actually want, or do they only want to pay 10% because they only want part of the service? And the last point on here is leave the door open. Always leave the door open on price objections because you never know what's going to happen between today and the next time you speak to them. So you might say something like, I'm disappointed that we can't do business together at the moment. Look, I'm going to give you a call in a month to see if anything has changed. If they had challenges, problems, concerns, can't find skill sets, taking too long to find candidates, projects are starting, morale is being affected by the jobs being shared around, etc., between people while they're picking up the slack, that's not going to be solved overnight. In fact, that problem may get worse for them over the coming weeks. So always leave the door open when we get to price objections.